history of rock and roll. Black history of rock and roll. Today I'm going to present the band DeFe. Now, for those that have waited for this series, I'm sorry it's been a while since I've done this, but I'm trying to get back into the rhythm again. But about this band right here, hailed from France back in like the early to mid 2000s. The lead guy in the center right here, Mao Ka, I hope I'm saying his name right. He is also a solo artist that does a little bit more conventional sort of African pop music. I've talked to him a few times back in the day. Really nice guy. How I found out about this band, I was actually on an old board, the first Afropunk board back in the early 2000s, and started by James Spooner, the movie, based off of the movie, which also made a community, and that's what James Spooner was all about. He really wanted to unite a lot of black folks within the punk scene because we shared a lot of the same experiences, and just, his whole thing was not just about punk rock, it was just about black people in general, and having a forum for us to talk about these things, whether you're punk rock or not, or whether you're into any kind of alternative, quote unquote, scenes, or scenes that I guess some people would consider that are not predominantly black, but have a lot of black participants, and I could talk about that later. But James made that forum, and then we'd post about different bands, especially bands with black members or full black bands. And this was one of them. I mean, I remember the first time I heard them, I was like, wow, this band's very different, and they ended up actually playing in Afropunk liberation sessions like some years back. I wish I could have made it. Some friends of mine from our West Coast Afropunk affiliate actually went out. So that was dope, man. I mean, and they told me it was a great show. I would have loved to see this band live, but on about this band, how could I say this? Their style, they actually called it Zwinks. For all you Caribbeans out there, you know what that means. I think it was an older term probably used, but for those that don't, Zwinks means crazy. Just out there, like crazy. But they've also, they've coined that for their music. And their music, I don't like the term new metal because it reminds me of like Limp Bizkit and all that. I would never put these guys in that category. I'm sure that they earlier on were fans of Slipknot and all that, but I would not put them in any category with any of those bands. They had their own thing. They fused a lot of the modern metal stuff with pretty much its African roots. I'm gonna do a video on the African roots of heavy metal someday, but for now I'm just gonna talk about this band. But distinctly African type, tribal type stuff going on there. But people have also called them tribal metal. They've also been called Congo metal, especially after the last album that they released. And it's perfect, shoot. There's they have a bunch of other titles, but this band sounds, it's kind of hard to describe them. They're metal, but they're not like any other metal band that you've ever heard. They have like this vibe where the first album was a little bit more conventional, I'll say. They had those grooves that they like mixed that sort of African pop music with some kind of hip hop influence, with straight up just heavy modern heavy metal. Now new metal fans would be like into that, because they, and the way that they played it was still aggressive and hard. This is like their later lineup. I'm gonna come back to that later. Their logo. This is the first lineup. They had a female singer and like a few other members. The female singer of the band, man, she really balanced out Mousie's vocals. But the thing about her that really stands out to me, both of them actually, you hear them singing in this, like, I don't want to compare people to Miriam Makeba, but kind of having that vibe with fused with just like almost like a Diamanda Galas, like just with where she was coming from. I mean, just like really like eerie vocals, beautiful and eerie vocals at the same time. You know, both of them, they're masters at the way that they sing and scream and growl and just shrill. Very great vocalists as far as the metal genre and the way that they communicate. And their music on this particular album, this is the first lineup, and this is their first album right here. They have songs about Kemet and all that, you know, just giving honor to black excellency and history and all that, man. Very conscious band. And just, this is a little bit more conventional for some people. I think it was very eclectic, punk, metal, African pop, and traditional African influences on this album, for sure. Now, the second album is the one that, whew, it's a sobering album. Now, you know, you got a lot of death metal bands that use gore. I can't even really look at this album cover much. They'll use gore just as a shock thing. With Defay, it wasn't shock. It was awakening. It was more of like, look at what's going on. It was angry. It wasn't just shock for the sake of shock or being horrific. This was talking about a real incident, the Rwandan genocide. And the album was called Rwanda. And that album in itself, it's nothing like the first album. Yeah, you have the same tribal vibes. It's the same, their own coined Zwink style. But they went more into a death metal grindcore sort of direction on this one. And even some black metal influences. But they, you know, I would say Congo metal for sure for this because of the subject matter. But it was very, very dark. The first one was heavy. And it was, I think it was a little bit more just, you know, like really, you could dance to it. Sorry about that, guys. I hate when people call during my broadcast, man. And I'm not going to erase this because I was on a roll. Definitely something more, I guess some people would call the first album more uplifting. This album right here was very sobering, very angry, and just totally like goes off talking about like what happened in Congo. I think he even gives the history of Congo and things that went down and how, you know, even colonization from, I wish I could interview Mozzy. I don't know where he is. I'd love to interview him and get just everything on this album. I forgot to mention that most of the album, if not all, pretty much like they're speaking in a few different languages. Creole is one of them. And I think they speak in French and I think a traditional African language from what I understand. But most of it's in Creole. It's a shame. I forgot. But I do remember that for sure. And man, it's just, how could I say this, man? That album is one of the most intense albums. And it's a death metal album where they're not glorifying the death. They're actually mourning, lament, and in anger of what happened there. It's a very angry album. It's a sobering album. And in a sense, as much as I like this band, I see why it was kind of like their last album. If you look on YouTube, you'll find them actually recording it and how they made it and everything. But the concept is there. The concept is realer than I don't know what, dude. Like, this is one of the truest, from what I understand, realest death metal albums that I've ever heard. You know, dealing with real subject matters and not sensationalizing it, but dealing with it for what it is and having the anger over this matter and the lamenting over it and just what caused it. If you guys have never heard Rwanda, check it out. And also their first one, which is self-titled, check it out. Now, with Rwanda, I also forgot to mention, they still have the tribal elements, you know, and all that, but it's even more brutal. Like, it's a trip, dude. You know, you listen to, I'm a fan, I'm a drummer, I'm a bassist, and I play some guitar, and I've done death metal stuff, and I have a lot of ideas, some of which actually has been displayed on this album, but of course, I probably conjugated a different way. These guys just executed it well. You still can't put them in a regular death metal, regular black metal, regular grindcore category on this album. It's just straight, it's non-stop, dude. And they still have like a lot of these traditional African rhythms. They're just in war mode on this one. It's a trip, man. DeFae, to me, represented basically that band that had no problem fusing traditional African music with death metal, because to be honest, there's a lot of influence. I'm gonna quote Ian Christie, who I've actually talked to. He's the author of the Sounds of the Beast, and I like the way he writes because he doesn't look at metal as just a European thing or a white thing. He said this, and I'm quoting him on this: metal has its roots on every continent. Oh man, I gotta find that quote. Has its roots in every continent, and I like the fact. I mean, this is a guy that he's one of the few authors that I really dig when it comes to writing about this genre of music, because he doesn't just focus on the European aspect or white aspect of it. He's really about, like, even the black artists. He goes and he presents those black artists. Like, he'll feature Caton and Hyrax and mention things about Jimi Hendrix that modern cats don't. And Snow White and a lot of other different bands. Anyways, but back to DeFae, I would say that they play this traditional stuff, but also it's like basically they're showing what heavy metal came from in a lot of ways. One of the major roots of heavy metal. I'm not denying that there's no European roots. That's silly if I would. But I'm just saying, African roots are still present in that music. And a band like DeFae shows that. Plus the fact that they played with all these different rhythms and the way that they kind of like intermingled and danced with even some of the pop elements of a lot of modern African music and fused it with metal. And for a band to also do death metal, and the way that they did it is just amazing. And that's why they've even formed their own genre of Zwinks, and they're the only ones so far that have created that. Zwinks is a great description of what they do. It's crazy, but at the same time, I look at that term as almost redefined as very eclectic metal. Like if you guys have ever heard Sepultura's Roots, that's cool and all, and I'm not down in Sepultura, and I'm sure that DeFae probably has some influences from that. But they totally took that tribal stuff in a whole different way. Anyway, I could talk about this stuff all day. Black History of Rock and Roll. Peace.